Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 195, Emecz Publishing.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Well, hello and welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, July is here. Can you believe it? Well, almost here. I guess we have one more day before July is here. The summer is upon us.
Summer is a-coming in. And the amazing thing is that the year is half gone.
No, we have half the year yet to greet us.
Ah, good. I like that. The calendar's half full.
A half full calendar. I like it. Yeah. Well, for all of you optimists out there, we would encourage you to go to ihose.co/ihose195 for the show notes here. We'll have links and all of the appropriate things that are necessary for you to round out your experience here with I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. We do encourage you to subscribe to us on whatever podcatcher you're on, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Last.fm or Spotify or wherever you find podcasts. And if you have it within you, we would highly, highly suggest that you help support the show. You can do that either via Patreon or PayPal. And we do have a certain level of rewards that we hand out to thank people who contribute at a higher level. But you can do it for as little as $1 an episode and have our eternal thanks. If you go to patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock, you can sign up and see what level of reward you would like to sign up for and what kind of tchotchkes related to Sherlock Holmes we will send your way. Steve Emecz is based in London, England. In 2004, he co-founded Emecz Publishing, a social enterprise with he and his wife Sharon, and they were working on books for children with learning difficulties. And in 2006, Steve published his first book on Sherlock Holmes, which was a review of the canon by historian Alistair Duncan. It was called Eliminate the Impossible. And today, Emecz has evolved into the largest publisher of Sherlock Holmes books in the world. They have over 400 Sherlock Holmes books in print, and they work with over 150 authors. Steve, welcome to the program.
Good evening, Scott.
Well, Emecz Publishing is, you have been in everyone's Sherlockian lives for the last decade plus. And, we want to get into a little bit more behind the scenes with you, but let's go way back and start with your first meeting with Sherlock Holmes. Tell us about that.
I guess my first meeting with Sherlock Holmes is no different from anybody else, really. I read a sort of dog-eared copy of Hound of the Baskervilles, and that was my first introduction. I guess I was probably about the age of 12, maybe 13 years old. My parents came over in the 1950s from Hungary, so they came over during the Hungarian Revolution. They met in a refugee camp in Aberystwyth in Wales, and I was brought up, my first language being Hungarian when I was a kid, and I had a bit of an unusual sort of childhood in that I would have sort of Hungarian-type dishes at home, and I would have a little bit of Hungarian culture mixed in with English culture. So back then, it was way before cable TV, of course. This was the 70s. And we only had 3 channels on the television. I remember the excitement having the 4th channel came on, Channel 4. That was a bit interesting. And I always read a lot when I was a kid. I used to write too. I used to write lots of letters all the time, lots of pen pals around the world, and just read quite widely. And yeah, probably 13, maybe 12, 13 years old, read Hound of the Baskervilles, absolutely loved it. Loved the deduction side of Holmes.
Well, that's fascinating. And, you know, to me, it brings to mind a very natural question. Which is the more difficult language, Welsh or Hungarian?
You see, well, Welsh has a lot of L's in it and lots of long words. Hungarian's complex. I think it's 47 letters in the Hungarian alphabet, something like that. And there's quite a few vowel sounds that English people can't produce. So one of my favourite games in my day job, which is in technology, is going to trade shows, starting to talk to people in a nice, strong London accent. When I hear the Hungarian accent, I will gravitate to the table that the people are at, start talking, probably go a bit more East London, go a bit sort of look bit more London, and then lull them into full sense of security, and then switch to fluent Hungarian, and so get that beautiful look on their face, which of amazement that this Englishman can speak Hungarian.
That is something. Now, have you read any of the Sherlock Holmes stories in your native Hungarian?
No, I haven't. I'm not as good at reading the language as I am at speaking it. I can speak perfect 1970s Hungarian. I sound quite old-fashioned when I go back to Hungary. I'm all right with kids. They kind of find me sort of an interesting take because my accent's quite good. But when I speak to particularly young people in their sort of 20s, they'll look at me and, you know, sometimes they'll bow and say, "Oh, I didn't realise you're, you know, from Downton Abbey or something like that," because I sound very formal. So the 1970s Hungarian is very different from the modern day.
Interesting. Well, you know, if it's any consolation, I get that from my kids, and I just speak plain English to them. So, tell us a little bit about your day job. I mean, technology, that's a pretty wide-ranging field. What is it that keeps you busy during the waking hours, other than Sherlock Holmes?
Well, I started my technology career in Xerox. I worked for them for about 13 years, and that's really where I first came across print-on-demand technology. So this was probably the early 2000s, and Xerox were making these big machines, and you would put paper in one end and a book would come out the other end, and it was kind of the first time print-on-demand had started. They didn't call it back then print-on-demand, but so that's when I got a real feel for what the future might look like in terms of books. Today, I work for a tech company. As with most people under the pandemic, I'm working from home, so used to sitting in front of a screen and having Teams and Zoom calls all day long. But generally, the last sort of 20 years, I've worked with anything to do with software and payments and any kind of tech, and it's been quite useful in with the publishing, because the publishing world has gone through a complete set of evolutions very, very quickly. With the internet coming along, and then Kindle, ebooks, now audio growing very fast. So having a day job in technology has been very useful in helping Emecz to be at the front of technology.
I mean, it's obvious you knew the publishing technology, but what was the point where you decided, why don't I just be a publisher?
Well, it's a bit of an embarrassing story, actually. I wrote, which I haven't told you this yet, Scott, so please don't tell anybody else. But I actually wrote a novel in 1997. I was travelling in the Australian outback, and I wrote my first book, and came back to the UK, had no intention of getting it published, but gave it to a few people to read. And a few people said, you really got to go to a publisher with this. This is great fun. So after, I think it was 41 attempts, I think it was the 42nd publisher. And this was back in the day when, again, before email or anything, you would mail in your copy of your manuscript after your synopsis had been approved. And they published this novel. It was a medium-sized publisher in the UK, and it did quite well, reached the sort of very, very bottom of the top 1,000. So you could say you were a bestseller, And it got awful reviews. It sold very well, so loads of fans. But I remember Time Out, I think, the reviewer said, I'm going to give it 1 star out of 5 because we don't do halves. And I think that's how the review started, and it got worse after that. And then the publisher said, look, we sold lots. We want you to write another one. So I wrote another one. And then the publisher went out of business. They were one of the casualties of the early sort of internet boom coming in sort of Y2K. And I found myself with a sequel to my book. We'd just written the screenplay, just taken it to Cannes Film Festival to try and raise money for the film. And the producer, by the way, we never made the film because we never made the money, but he got in touch and said, can you give me copies of the sequel? Because we're trying to raise the money for the film. And I said, well, I haven't got any copies. My publisher's gone bust. He says, you can't tell me that. He says, I need copies. So I happened to be talking to a friend of mine in the printing industry. And he said, well, just set up a publishing company and create the book. I said, well, I don't know anything about publishing. What do you mean? He said, oh, I can give you a few tips. So I set the publishing company up to create this second book, this sequel. So this was way before Emecz Publishing even existed. So I can't even remember what we called it at the time. But so it was a publishing company for a single book. And then I created it, published it, and we used it as part of the sort of marketing material to try and raise the money for the screenplay of the first book. And then I'd started to publish a few books here and there for people. And it really wasn't until 2006, as you mentioned, we published our first serious book, which was a book for kids with learning disabilities. And that's why we founded Emecz Publishing.
Huh. And so when did Sherlock Holmes come along?
Well, we'd done, I would say, half a dozen books. We carried on in the same theme and the same genre of book. They were NLP books, so neuro-linguistics programming. And we did some for cancer patients and critical trauma and a number of others. And I think we had about 10 books by then. And this chap, Alistair Duncan, came along to me and said, I've got this book, and I'd be very interested for you to publish it. But you have to understand it's quite controversial. And I said, okay, we've done some controversial stuff. We've worked with, neurolinguistics with critical trauma. That's pretty hard. It was very controversial at the time. And I said, what's the subject matter? He said, well, it's Sherlock Holmes. I said, great, Sherlock Holmes. I love Sherlock Holmes. What's it about? He said, well, it's a review of the canon. I said, yes, there's been some of those. And he said, the only thing is I've kind of told the truth. I said, what do you mean? And he's going to kill me for telling the story this way. But he said that the reviews of the canon up until that point had been done to a certain extent with rose-tinted spectacles. So if you imagine, reviews of the canon pre-2000 and 2008, the stories ranged from sort of good to wonderful. That was the spectrum. And what Alistair did was he reviewed with very factually based. He went through the entire canon and also all of the people that portrayed Holmes and Watson on stage and screen at the time, and just did it very factually. So the stories ranged from not very good up to wonderful. So that was the first book we ever did. And a lot of people wanted to not like the book because it was very frank about Conan Doyle's work. but everybody that reviewed it said, well, I can't really argue with what Alistair has said here because it's factually correct and very well constructed.
And with this initial taste of Holmes, where did you go from there? How did you decide what to do next?
Well, we did about another 6 or 7 books that were non-fiction, historical type books with Conan Doyle. And we then got approached by a chap called Tony Reynolds. And Tony brought us our very first collection of short stories. I'll use the term pastiche, although my wife doesn't really like that word in the sense that it's a word that only people in our community understand what a pastiche is. So if I say to somebody I've published pastiches, they're outside of the Sherlock Holmes world. I have to actually explain what a pastiche is. And what Tony had done was he'd written some really good quality pastiches, but also combined them with some amazing illustrations. So there's a chap called Chris Cody who did the illustrations, and they're almost Paget-esque. I mean, they're incredible. And that was the very first book that we did. And I thought at the time, because it was my first experience with pastiches, was this is how pastiches are done. You know, they're not just stories, but they're illustrations as well as the stories. But I think that was the only illustrated pastiche we've ever done. And we've done probably another sort of 400 plus since then. What happened after that was a bit of a whirlwind, really, because shortly after the first Robert Downey Jr. movie came out, and we were sort of inundated with people wanting to produce pastiches, and that became the vehicle that enabled us to grow Emecz. And we'd started Emecz as a social enterprise. So my wife and I were very passionate about working with kids with learning disabilities, and that's where it started. And as Emecz grew, we grew it alongside our day jobs. It enabled us to start getting involved with some other causes.
Where did that come from? Your focus on kids, learning disabilities, and so on. I mean, of all the things you could, not that there's anything wrong with it, certainly. I'm just curious how that was the spark.
It was a wonderful chap I worked with at Xerox. His name's Andrew Bendefi, and he'd developed, along with a lovely lady called Olive Hickmott, a technique whereby using neurolinguistics, it's the first application of neurolinguistics for children who'd been diagnosed as having dyslexia. And at the time, dyslexia was very over-diagnosed. So only about maybe 1 or 2 out of 10 children diagnosed as dyslexic were actually dyslexic. And what they identified was that a high proportion of these children were actually simply high visualizers. So they learnt visually. So they developed a series of techniques that enabled within a few minutes to identify that a child is a high visualizer, and enabled their teachers and parents to change the way they taught the children. So the technique was incredible. We changed the lives of probably somewhere between 10 and 15,000 kids simply by. The book was a bestseller, and it did incredibly well, and it was used in Train the Trainer for hundreds of practitioners around the world.
Steve, cause marketing, or I don't want to say cause marketing because really this is more than that. You've ever since then taken a portion of the profits of Emecz Publishing and put it towards some sort of mission, something to do with charity work or some kind of cause. Can you talk a little bit about some of the causes that you support? Yeah,
we have 4 or 5. I think that probably I can talk to 2 or 3 of them in a bit of detail. So one of our main projects is a project called Happy Life Children's Home, and it's based in Nairobi in Kenya. And about 9 years ago, my wife took a career break and went to Africa. She retrained as a teacher, and she spent a month in Kenya. And she ended up with the Happy Life Children's Home, and they basically rescue abandoned babies from the streets of Nairobi, and primarily try to get them adopted and find families for them. But if they don't get adopted, then the kids stay with Happy Life until they're old enough to basically fend for themselves and go out to work. So we started working with them round about, I would say, 2013, 2014. And Sharon took me out that first Christmas to Happy Life, and we spent Christmas and New Year with the kids. We started with just simple volunteering, feeding babies. So, 20 babies at a time. It's quite a lot of feeding, painting and, playing with the kids. And that's really evolved. So, as we've gone back every year, so we've been back every Christmas and New Year since. And the last few years, we've actually been working on much more strategic projects with them. So 2 years ago, for example, we completely video enabled their different locations, which is saving them tens of thousands of dollars in travel, because they're now able to. So we help train them to have their team meetings and from one location to another. So they now do all of their meetings via Zoom. 3 years ago, we had a project to bring ping pong to one of their locations. And you may smile. I see you smiling when I say ping pong. I was a ping pong player when I was a kid. And the reason we did that was because when they're the rainy season, and it's torrential rain outside, and you've got 100 kids stuck indoors, you can't get the cardio. So they had seen a video of me playing ping pong with my father, and the kids said, "Oh, can we play?" And the teacher said, "No, you can't play. We haven't got any tables, we haven't got any bats, and we haven't got any balls." And they happened to mention this to me on a Zoom on a Zoom call, and I said, "Why not?" They said, "Well," I said, "Sort of challenge accepted." So we actually managed to get 2 ping pong tables shipped to this small village outside of Nairobi, and our next trip to Kenya was with 2 suitcases full of bats and nets and balls and things like that. But the biggest project we've done with them this year, and it's our most successful one, is my wife came up with the idea. It's a wonderful program called Books to Trees. And what we're doing is every book that's bought on the Emecz Publishing website in 2020, we're planting a tree at Happy Life. And we had the bold idea of doing 1,000 trees. And everybody said, "That's crazy, try and get 1,000 trees done in a year." And we're currently sitting about 750 already, and we're only in June. So, and what was really sweet, it brings tears to your eyes. They sent us pictures of the kids planting the banana trees, because under COVID, they've decided to change the trees that they're planting because the trees grow quite fast there, and they've realised that creating food from the trees is also going to be a really good idea for the compound. So that's Happy Life. One a bit closer to home for the Holmesians is we support Stepping Stone School, which is school for kids with severe learning disabilities, and that's based at Undershaw, which is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's former home. So I'm a patron of the school, and we've been supporting those guys for about 6 years, 7 years, something like that. And our biggest collection of stories, which is called the Emecz Book of New Sherlock Holmes Stories, which hopefully is on your shelf somewhere, but I'm holding up a copy of it here. We started this project. We're probably going to talk about it in a little while, but it's the largest collection of Sherlock Holmes short stories in the world. And so far we've raised about $65,000 for the school.
That's wonderful.
Really amazing. And, we've covered the Emecz collection on IHearOfSherlock.com, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more, but this began with a single volume, and there were how many stories in that first volume, Steve?
Yeah, it's a very funny story. So the guy who came up with this whole idea is a wonderful writer and editor called David Marcum. And David, I think, has just written his 60th pastiche, so he's very happy to have achieved the same number of stories as ACD. And David woke up one morning a bit fed up of all of the modern adaptations that were happening at the time. I won't mention any in particular because that will get me and him in trouble. But he yearned for the traditional pastiche, and he loves a good pastiche, does David. But he wants the real, true Holmes and Watson in the right era. No ghosts allowed type stuff. And he got in touch with me and he said, "Look, I've got this idea for fundraising for Undershaw. I'm going to break the record of the most amount of traditional pastiches in one collection." I said, "Okay, what's the record?" He said, "It's 26. We've got to do more than 26. I said, "Okay. So how many fit in a book?" So I went back to the printers and said, "Right, how many will fit in a volume?" And they said, "We can fit probably about 30 in a volume." And that's where it started. It was going to be one volume, but by the time we got to publication in, I think it was October, we'd ended up with 60 stories, and some of them were quite a bit longer than we'd thought, and we ended up with 3 volumes. So there we were with 3 volumes, 60 stories, broken the record by far. The launch party was incredible. We had people flying in from all over the world. Conan Doyle family were there. The estate were really helpful. It was an incredible thing, and we did a massive Kickstarter for it. It went super well. And then David got in touch shortly after to say, "We've got a bit of a problem because we've got quite a lot of authors that didn't make it the cut. And they're really good stories, Steve. Would you mind if we did one more? Just one more. I promise you, just one more." And we said, "Okay, I'll do one more, and we'll do it for Conan Doyle's birthday." So we did it on the 22nd of May the following year. And sure enough, it was another 30 odd stories, something like that. And straight after he got in touch, he said, "You wouldn't want to do another one, would you? Because lots of people love this, and they're saying it's wonderful." I said, "Well, we're raising quite a lot of money for the cause, then maybe we do one more." So we did volume 5, which came out at Christmas. It's full of Christmas stories, and that's still the most popular one, I think, out of all of the volumes that we've done. It still sells really well today. And if you fast forward to 2020, we've just published volumes 19, 20, and 21. So the collection's just incredible. We've had over 200 authors take part, more than 400 stories, over 1 million words, over 10,000 pages, and some huge names have taken part. Lee Child, Jonathan Kellerman, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lindsay Fay, Bonnie McBird, David Stuart Davis, loads and loads of people from the Sherlock Holmes world have taken part, and it's been a fantastic experience.
How do you do all this? It just sounds amazing. I mean, if I was in your shoes, I would be, flat on my back, because for our listeners who don't know, there's a lot more than just getting the words on the page to publishing. There's design and proofreading, there are editorial processes, there's warehousing, inventorying, shipping. I mean, technology only goes so far.
Yeah, I'm surrounded. So Emecz doesn't have any employees. We're all volunteers in the business, and we're all people that have the same vision around the causes that we support. And that's been, I think, the secret to its success, because everybody that's involved with it is just doing it for 2 things, fun and passion. We have 2 amazing editors. David, I've already mentioned. He's edited. I think he holds a world record now for the most amount of Sherlock Holmes stories edited. He's way over 500 now. And the other editor who needs a shout out is Richard Ryan. So Richard's a retired editor. So he was an editor for about 40 years. And we've just publishing his 5th novel in October. And Rich edits for us as well. As a volunteer. We have The only full-time person in the business, still not waged, I'm not going to pay her anything, is my wife, who's a co-founder. She was her last role was as the global head of marketing at The Economist. So she's used to looking at the sort of publishing process and handling the marketing side. So she gives me a lot of support around that. But one of the things for us is that we don't have any kids of our own. So this is my obsession that drives me outside of my day job.
I know the feeling, except for the kid part.
Would you like some kids, actually, Steve? Because
we can arrange that.
We could send them to you.
Yeah, well, sometimes when people say, Steve, do you have kids? I say, well, for 50 weeks of the year, I don't have any. And then for 2 weeks, I have 150.
That's a balance. Yeah. On average, you have none. Let's take a quick pause here for a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, we'll talk more with Steve Emecz about where Emecz Publishing is going next. Stay tuned.
Illustrators bring characters to life. Great illustrators create lasting images that define great characters for all time, like James Montgomery Flagg's Uncle Sam, N.C. Wyeth's Long John Silver, and Sidney Paget's Sherlock Holmes. Now every Sidney Paget illustration of the cases of Sherlock Holmes, 356 eternal images, reproduced directly from the Strand magazine and the surviving original artwork, are collected in one place for the very first time by Nick Utekin. Watson told us what Sherlock Holmes looked like, but Sidney Paget showed us Sherlock Holmes for all time. Don't wait until this remarkable volume is out of print. Get the complete Paget portfolio right now at our wesexpress.com.
Okay, we're back enjoying this conversation about Emecz Publishing. Steve, you mentioned David Marcum and this amazing record of most Sherlockian stories edited. And that's certainly way more than Watson or Conan Doyle edited themselves. What kind of standards do you put in place for people who want to contribute to the Emecz Publishing empire? Do you have a kind of bar that you set for people that say, I've got a Sherlock Holmes story? And how do they go about doing that?
Well, they can go to the website. And what's interesting is that we've never advertised for authors since the business was founded 14 years ago. We literally publish maybe 30 or 40 books a year, and it's all been inbound. And being frank and honest with you, the bar is set much, much higher today than it was before. When we first started out, we were quite heavily reliant on authors finding an editor and getting their work edited, and then we would work with it. So, we were really more a light editing and formatting house back then. Now we have Richard and David set the bar pretty high. So we have launched a second imprint last year for the more unusual stories that come our way. So we've gone a bit more since, I would say, probably 2 years ago. We've gone quite serious in terms of both the standard and also the traditional nature of the pastiche, because what we found is that there is a home for things that are less standard. So we've created a fun imprint called Orange Pip Books, and we're doing a few books under that brand now, and that's more the kind of different interpretations, whereas before everything Holmesian that came our way, we were kind of a home for everything, from quiz books to unusual pastiches featuring Alice in Wonderland or Sherlock Holmes as a warlock, these kind of things. So But now today we focus mainly on bigger, more complex projects, and also much more on standard traditional pastiches.
How long does it take you? Does it take a book to go through the process?
Well, there's how long does it technically go through the process, and how long does it actually go through the process? So the fastest book we ever did, we did it from a standing start and a blank sheet of paper to fully published in our hands in 27 days.
Wow.
And we did that. It was called The Empty House, and it was a compilation of fan fiction, poems, writings for the cause of Undershore. So before Undershore was a school, it was due to be demolished by a property developer. And we got approached by a wonderful fan site called Sherlockology. And they said, we want to put a book together to promote the cause of the legal case, which was going to the High Court. And I said, well, when's it going to the High Court? And they said, well, it's going next month. I said, well, is it ready? Is the book ready? Well, we haven't started it yet. So we got this challenge to do an entire book completely from scratch. And it's still, I think, the only book in the world to feature 4 Sherlock Holmeses on the cover. So it has, I'm going to forget who's on the cover now, but it's got Jeremy Brett and Benedict Cumberbatch and I think Douglas Wilmer and one more.
Peter Cushing, maybe?
Potentially Cushing, but I'm going to be a lot trouble for this now. You put me on the spot at 10 o'clock at night. So what had happened was that we wanted to create this amazing cover, and it had a picture of the ramshackle Undershore, a photograph of the building that had gone into disrepair, and the 4 photographs of the actors on the front. And if you go to the Emecz Publishing Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Emecz Publishing, you'll see across the header the original picture that we wanted to use for the cover. And the original picture actually had 5 Sherlocks, because we actually had RDJ as well. We had Robert Downey Jr., but the guys couldn't get the permission from Warner Brothers quick enough, because it took longer than the 27 days that we had. So we actually had to cut his face out and put just the other 4 Sherlocks on it. So technically you can do it within 27 days. I think that the reality, Bert, is that you kind of have to put a publication date, 5 or 6 months out, not because the process is that slow anymore. In the old days, when publishers did it, it was slow because it went through a typesetting process and plates and all that sort of stuff. Now it's all digital. So as long as you can get the manuscript into a Word file, and then you're pretty much halfway there. But the whole game has changed now. It's all about the author building themselves up with the publisher's help as a brand. They need to be putting themselves out there. We urge all of the authors, the best way to start establishing yourselves is to write a good blog, get people to understand that your style of writing. So they, when somebody finds a book, they're two steps away from Googling you to find out who you are, whether you're any good. And if it's your first book, or if it's non-fiction in particular, they need to understand that before they part with their hard-earned money, that they like your writing. So
that's a great point. Now, speaking of speed to market, there's another project you've got that is just weeks away from completion on Kickstarter. Do you want to talk a little bit about the Jeremy Brett biography?
Yeah, so this is probably the most complex book that I've had the pleasure to work on in the last sort of decade and a half. It's written by a lovely lady called Maureen Whitaker, and this is kind of a life's work for Maureen. And she's put together a book that's close to 500 pages long. I think it's 470 pages long, and it's a complete performance biography of Jeremy Brett. So it covers absolutely every major performance that Jeremy's in. The section covering homes is about 90 to 100 pages just covering homes. And it's quite an incredible book. We're producing it in 3 formats because most of the photographs in are in colour, and many of the photographs are extremely rare. So these are photographs that most of the fans will not have seen. So she's got special permission from a number of people to produce the photographs. The foreword is written by David Marcum, who of course played Watson for Brett's Holmes. And it's been an incredible project to work on. Rich Ryan has helped a lot with the editing. We've had a couple of other people helping with the editing as well. Gretchen Alterbach has helped as well with that. And I got the enviable job of formatting. And it was something I could have given to somebody else, but I just wanted to do it myself. And, seeing these hundreds and hundreds of photographs of Jeremy and just seeing what an amazingly varied career he has, because I was one of those people who knew him really for homes, but he was in dozens and dozens of films and loads of theatre productions and many, many TV series as well. So the formats we've gone for, one of the things that we sort of pride ourselves at Emecz is really push the envelope on printing technology. So I'm quite proud of the fact that we were the world's first completely digital publisher. So we've been print on demand since the very beginning, and we still do that. So we don't print warehouses full of books. Every book is printed when the person wants the book. And what that means is that we actually, with the Books to Trees project, we're actually carbon positive now as a publisher, which is kind of weird when you say it out loud. It's a book publisher that's positively providing carbon. But the Jeremy Brett book is, we think, it's going to be the largest ever print-on-demand, full-colour, hardback. Certainly for our printers and publishers, they've never produced anything that big. We pushed the envelope a bit earlier with the Art of Sherlock Holmes books, which we'll talk about in a bit. But now the challenge you've got with that is that whilst that is it's a 500-page hardback, it's American foolscap size. So I've got an example of the art book here. It's that big, guys. But imagine that 2.5 times as thick.
A coffee table book, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be a strong coffee table. Let's put it that way. But we're doing the hardback version. We're doing a color paperback, but we're also producing it as a black and white paperback as well. Because print on demand in black and white is pretty competitive now compared to regular printing. But print on demand color has got quite a long way to go in terms of being able to meet the price point. And print on demand color hardback, that's still in its early days. The whole Emecz collection, by the way, the hardbacks, they're all print on demand as well. So the good thing with that is it means that it enables you to do lots and lots of projects, because you're not risking the house on every publishing project, because you're not printing, in the old days, people used to have to print 5,000 copies of a book, and if it didn't sell, they were in real trouble, But now you can even mitigate some of that risk as well by doing the crowdfunding with things like Kickstarter.
What do you think about ebooks and audiobooks and things like that?
So ebooks are interesting because I think ebooks for me are a bit like, there's a big parallel there with MP3, because you've got there's a massive MP3 came along and it was going to completely kill the other formats, and now vinyl's coming back. So ebooks have their place. I mean, I have a Kindle, and when I was traveling a lot with work, it was a very, very practical way of carrying. I read fast, I read a lot of books when I'm traveling. So, I couldn't put 5 paperbacks in my carry-on when I was traveling for work. So a Kindle makes a lot of sense. But for me, a print book is the way to consume. Audio is the fastest growing format, though, I think, in terms of publishing these days. And when that started to happen, with ebooks, fine, change the technology, no problem. I got my head around that quite quickly. But when audio started to kick off, couple of my publishing friends said to me, this audio thing's going to be real trouble for us because we can't get hold of the narrators. And I thought, oh dear, that's going to be quite hard. So got involved with some of the audio platforms and put a few of the books out there and got flooded with narrators and couldn't really understand it. Got in touch with a couple of them and they said, oh, it was my life's dream to narrate Holmes. So there we had narrators who were, actors who were in between acting gigs wanting to read our books because they desperately wanted to be the voice of Holmes, which is wonderful. So we've got about 200 books in audio now.
That's something. Well, we are huge proponents of audio, as you can probably imagine. I'm wondering, Steve, about the Brett Kickstarter. Why Kickstarter in that case versus simply releasing it on the website?
So Kickstarter's evolved a little bit. When we first used it, we used it to mitigate the risk of a project that was going to be costly. So one of the early Kickstarters that we did was wonderful graphic novels by Peter Koppel. I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Koppel's work, but it's a lovely story, actually. Jay Ganguly, who's the chairman of the Sherlock Holmes Society of India, she asked me as a favour to meet Peter because she said that people were buying Peter's graphic novels. He won the Comic Book of the Year award in the Czech Republic for Scandal in Bohemia. It's that good. And she said people are buying it, having it shipped all the way to India, and they can't read it because it's in the Czech language. But they're buying it because the artwork is so amazing. They've seen copies of the artwork. Can you please get it translated and release it in English? Now, translating from Czech language to English is actually not that easy to get done and quite expensive. So and Peter was quite insistent that he wanted to do all of his books. So he's got 3 Sherlock Holmes ones and The Lost World, so a Challenger book. And I thought, this was kind of a big thing. So we thought, well, and it's, it should suit Kickstarter because it's comic books essentially, where they're graphic novels. They're about 160 pages. They're proper novel size. And we put it on Kickstarter and it was a huge success. And what we found when we looked into the numbers behind Kickstarter was that it was a different audience. And I found that very interesting. So what we do now is we do lots of Kickstarters. We've got Kickstarter running pretty much all the time. So the current one's Jeremy Brett. And the answer simply is people will find things on Kickstarter easier than they will find things elsewhere. And it's a fantastic marketing tool.
That's a great reason. And we will have a link to the Kickstarter campaign for the Jeremy Brett bio in the show notes, as well as links to all of these other books and projects that we're talking about. Steve, you just touched on the artwork and the graphic novels, and that naturally leads us to thinking about the art of Sherlock Holmes, which is a project that's been going on for the past, I want to say 3 or 4 years. And again, like with the Emecz collection, there have been different iterations along the way because of the success. Can you tell us a little bit about what the art of Sherlock Holmes is and how it came about?
Yes, this is another example of somebody else's brilliant idea and me just being the guy putting it together. So this brilliant idea came from a wonderful chap called Phil Growick. And Phil, we've published 2 of his novels. So the Secret Journal of Dr. Watson was his first one, and then The Revenge of Sherlock Holmes. And they're great fun pastiches. I love them. And I think it was the first one of our own pastiches that I read 3 times. It's loads of fun and humour and adventure, swashbuckling type Holmes. And Phil's a real New Yorker and retired to West Palm Beach in Florida. And he's the chairman of Art in Public Places there. So Phil rings me up out of the blue and says, I've had this idea. Okay, Phil, what's the idea? He said, well, I want to combine my 2 loves of this world, art and Sherlock Holmes. And I had this idea. You've got all these amazing stories from the Emecz book of Sherlock Holmes stories. You've got loads of them. Why don't we give stories 2 artists and get them to paint a painting or create a piece of art from the story. And let's see if we can get enough together, and we'll put them in a gallery, and we'll put them in a book, and we'll do a whole bunch of stuff around it. I said, okay, where are you going to find, sort of a dozen or 15 artists? He said, I says, there's loads of them here in West Palm Beach, and I know loads of these guys, and I'll run the idea past them. So he did, and they absolutely loved the idea. So the first edition was the Art of Sherlock Holmes West Palm Beach, and he managed to get an amazing gallery called the Anne Norton Sculpture Gardens to exhibit the art. And we got really lucky. It was a huge success. The local press went mad for it. Americans love Sherlock Holmes, but they love art, and you put the two together. The gallery was kind of a sellout. We sold a bunch of the art from off the wall as well, which was amazing. And we had part of it. One of the artists who took part was a chap called Bruce Helander. And I think Bruce holds one of the records for his art being in more galleries than any other major artist in the world. He's in the Guggenheim, he's in the Smithsonian, he's in the the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I call it the Met, and Phil tells me off for that. So a load of these artists came to the launch. I came over and was there as well. The book was the first hardback colour book that we tried. So this is the prequel to what we're doing with the Brett book. And the premise is pretty simple. You've got, a coffee table book. You open it up. It's got the bio of the artist, the bio of the author, and the piece of art. So you see this piece of art and you think, that's a lovely piece of art. Wonder what it means. Then you read the story, which is behind the piece of art. Then you go back and look at the art again in a whole new sort of view on the art. And Phil managed to get 15 artists together, some portrait painters, abstract, modern art, etc., a whole wide range. And we had so much fun with it that he said, why don't we expand it? And we went USA wide. So he opened it wider, and anybody from the USA could participate. So we had another sort of 13, 14 artists from all over the USA took part, and that book came out last year. And again, huge amount of fun. We exhibited at the Paul Fisher Gallery. Again, some of the art sold. And Phil added a cause, by the way, to our list of causes. So we had Happy Life, Stepping Stones, and Phil added the American Cancer Society, which is his passion project. I added one more as well, but we'll come back to that one later. And so we had so much fun with that I said to Phil, what's next? What's bigger than the United States? He said, well, we're going to go global. So in January this year, we did Global, the first global book. And again, he reached out around the world, and we had artists from a dozen different countries from all over the world. And we're just publishing tomorrow. Well, it's about 2 hours away for me here in the UK.
It's today.
Global 2.
Yeah.
And I have a copy of Global 2 here. And on Saturday night, we had the launch party. Obviously, it was supposed to be at a gallery in London with all of the art on the wall. But sadly, we've not been able to do the live gallery. We've done it as an online launch party. So, that's the background on the art of Sherlock Holmes. Phil's wacky idea 2.5 years ago, and suddenly we now have, by sheer luck, we didn't engineer this, 56 pieces of art.
Huh. We only need 4 more.
Yep.
Well, that's quite an evolution of the publishing house. Now, you mentioned there was one other cause you wanted to talk about. What is that, and what's it related to that you're doing? Yeah,
so 3 years ago, I was working for a technology company in Germany, working with artificial intelligence in the finance community. And I read a quite incredible article on LinkedIn, and it was written by the head of the innovation arm of the World Food Programme, based out of Munich. And the article was all about how technology was helping the UN World Food Programme tackle world hunger. And they use a lot of artificial intelligence, a lot of machine learning, some blockchain, all of the modern technologies to help with this really the biggest problem facing the planet. So, you're talking about 800 million people don't have enough to eat. And the World Food Programme is the largest charitable organisation in the world with a budget, I think it's about 7 billion now. So it's a huge entity. And it's changed from being simply the world's biggest logistics organization, getting food to people in, displaced people in war zones and things like that, to becoming a really innovative organization trying to change the way farming works, change the way things work around the world to help people create their own crops, etc. So I just reached out to him and said, look, I'm working in artificial intelligence. I've read this amazing article. Can I do anything? And he said, look, tell me a little bit about yourself and what skills you've got, and maybe there's something you can do. So I told him what I did, and he said, wow. He said, okay, so could you be a technology mentor for us? Can you, a few times a year, can you jump on a plane and come to Munich and help these projects? And so I've been doing that for the last 3 years. I'm actually participating on Wednesday in the latest external advisory council meeting for the World Food Programme Innovation Accelerator. And it's been a privilege working with these guys. And interestingly, one of the things that people say about the World Food Programme is they get things to places when all the other logistics fails. So if you've got a flood or if you've got a major earthquake or whatever, and nothing else is getting there, the World Food Programme gets there. So they've got the ability to get to places when nothing else is moving. So guess what? They are at the forefront of the battle against COVID-19 because they are getting masks, they're getting equipment, they're getting stuff to a lot of these places that are in lockdown. So when the other logistics isn't working, the World Food Programme team, tens of thousands of people worldwide, have mobilized, and they are feeding more people now than ever before. That's our fourth cause, which I'm very passionate about.
That's something. That is really amazing. Well, Steve, I feel like we could continue this conversation for another 3 hours, but I don't think our listeners would have it. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up here?
I'm a big fan of the podcast. All I would say is that we wouldn't be anywhere without the authors. So everything starts with the written word. We've done a lot with it. We've created art books. We're working with the subscription guys, Dear Homes. I forgot to mention that earlier, the subscription service where you can become Sherlock Holmes from at home, and the Emecz collection. But it all starts with the authors, and I'd love to give a big shout out to those guys, because without them, then you can't publish if there's no written word.
Well, I expect we'll be hearing much more about goings on there. And Steve, our best to you and to Sharon, and we really appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. It's an amazing tribute to storytelling. It's an amazing tribute to technology. But talking to Steve it's also an amazing tribute to heart. You and I both dabble in marketing, and we've talked in the past about Simon Sinek, and Simon is a thinker, a consultant in marketing, but Simon's work is sort of characterized by starting with why. Nobody really cares about what you do. What they really care about is why. And so the social enterprise, the social causes, the 750 trees 6 months into the year, the whole why of what Steve and Sharon are doing is really remarkable.
It is. And there's so much now that you hear about cause marketing, and it seems like a lot of people can come at this in a very cynical way. And, they greenwash, right? Or they do corporate social responsibility things because it's what you're supposed to do. Well, if it's not coming from the heart, if it's not within the culture of your organization, then it usually doesn't work too well. It's just slapping on an extra layer. And what you've got here from Emecz Publishing, you can tell it's something that Steve and Sharon have cared about for a long time, and they're continuing to imbue that into their creations, and inviting other people like Phil Growick to do his own causes. The American Cancer Society with the proceeds from the Art of Sherlock Holmes going to that. I think it's wonderful, and I'm so glad we had a chance to really scratch way beneath the surface of Emecz Publishing with Steve here, because quite frankly, I would not have guessed any of this based on, my previous assumptions and my previous experience with Emecz Publishing.
Great story.
Nice surprise.
Yeah.
Well, that sound that you hear there, the dulcet tones of our quiz program, means it's time for everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz show. That's right, it's Canonical Couplets. We give you 2 lines of poetry, and you tell us which Sherlock Holmes story we were referring to. And in the last episode, we gave you this clue. A figure at the window gave a fright that took a note from Holmes to set her right. Bert, do you know which story we were talking about this time around?
Oh, yes. That's the story about the horrible accident about the creme caramel Mrs. Hudson was working on. That's the crooked flan.
Oh, flan. You do not disappoint, my friend. I will tell you that.
You mean that's not right?
No, I'm afraid the answer we were looking for this time around was the blanched soldier. See, you were thinking a little bit differently in your cooking techniques. We were looking for a blanching process, not a baking process. What can I tell you? We're going to give a spin to our big prize wheel here, watching it go around. And as it slows down, we look for it to land on number 21. Lucky 21. All right. And that corresponds to John McCartan. John, congratulations. You win a run of the 2019 Baker Street Journal, including the Christmas Annual. Congratulations. And now that we've settled that, we have, our penultimate canonical couplet from the original set waiting for you here. Just a quick note here. If you've been following all of these canonical couplet quizzes, you actually had the ability to get the right answers because we took this from an article in the Baker Street Journal. This was a contribution by Russell McLaughlin in, I think it was volume 4, number 1 of the Baker Street Journal. It was called The Problem of the Canonical Couplets. And he listed 50 of them out here. We've added 10 more that weren't originally included in Russell's contribution there to the BSJ. But had you known early on, had you been an owner of the EBSJ, you could have searched for that and found it. Oh, well. Better luck next time. So, the canonical couplet for this episode is as follows. When a missing gem sparked consternation, Holmes chose a sly impersonation. If you know the answer, please jot it down in an email to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with the subject line canonical couplet. If you are among the correct answers and we choose your name at random, you'll win a book from Emecz Publishing. Good luck. Well, how about that, Bert?
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. Well, we've got one more in that original 60-story canonical couplet round, and then we're going to go back and do it all over again with new couplets. Because we have too many books to give away. We absolutely cannot stop now. Well, this was a lot of fun. Let's do it again in 2 weeks, shall we?
Oh, okay. Hold on. Let me look at my calendar. Yes, I'm available.
Whew. What a relief. Well, this is the always available Scott Monty.
And this is the usually tardy Bert Wolder.
And together we say, The game's afoot.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.